Sophia had always dreamt of beautiful things like true, sincere love, raising caring children, and a cozy family nest, but fate was unkind to this young woman. Sometimes it seemed to her that she bore the heavy burden of spinsterhood, and at times, she contemplated visiting a witch solely due to this absurd misfortune. Unfortunately, Sophia's misfortunes pursued her not only in her personal life. In life, some women find success in their family life, while others rapidly climb the career ladder. Regrettably, Sophia was not lucky in either aspect. By the time she turned 26, she had not yet met her significant other, despite several attempts to start relationships. She also couldn't achieve substantial success in her professional career. Perhaps with parental support that would have encouraged her and provided advice, things might have been different. But, alas, Sophia was an orphan. By education, she was a psychologist and always aspired to help people. She was willing to do so, but not in the way she had envisioned in her student dreams. Working in the field of psychology never materialized. She tried her hand as a waitress, worked in the retail sector, and even attempted to align her life with journalism, writing articles for a children's newspaper. However, her final stop was a position as a sanitation worker in a homeless shelter. This job was far from her dream. Sophia's duties included cleaning up homeless people who were brought in straight from the streets and providing them with beds and clothing. It was a challenging and ungrateful job in which Sophia smelled the stench of dirt and sweat every day. She saw bodies covered in bruises, warts, and scratches. During the winter, she had to deal with frostbitten limbs. Homeless individuals, for the most part, did not appreciate the efforts of Sophia and her colleagues. Many of them arrived at the shelter aggressive and intoxicated, insulting and causing disturbances. They tore up the government-provided bedding and left a mess behind. Throughout her shift, Sophia had no respite and couldn't even enjoy a cup of tea. The other sanitation workers at the shelter didn't take their work too seriously. They made crude jokes, had a relaxed attitude towards their wards, took occasional breaks, smoked cigarettes, and snacked on sandwiches. Sophia, on the other hand, was different. She worked as if the world depended on her efforts, silently and without breaks. She often bit her lip, focusing on her work. Due to her diligence, colleagues, possibly with sympathy or mockery, nicknamed Sofia our Cinderella. Sometimes Sophia overheard coworkers gossiping behind her back, trying to explain why she was so different. She was an orphan and never had the support of a complete family like the others. In their opinion, this could be the reason for Sophia's failures in her personal life. Their conversations hurt Sophia deeply, but she remained silent and politely interacted with all her colleagues, from Aunt Thea, the janitor, to Aunt Holly, the cook, and even the shelter's management. Biting her lip, she simply carried out her work without complaints or claims. The other sanitation workers at the shelter didn't take their work too seriously. They made crude jokes, had a relaxed attitude towards their wards, took occasional breaks, smoked cigarettes, and snacked on sandwiches. Sophia, on the other hand, was different. She worked as if the world depended on her efforts, silently and without breaks. She often bit her lip, focusing on her work. After a grueling shift at the shelter, Sophia usually stopped at a store on her way home. The young woman always bought the same things: cheese, a bottle of kefir, white bread, and some canned goods. She knew how to cook but did it without much pleasure. Having dinner alone, she often savored bites of herring in tomato sauce, but still felt the bitter loneliness that enveloped her every evening. Sophia sighed repeatedly, thinking, maybe my colleagues are right. Maybe I am truly inadequate. Even on New Year's, fate did not have any joyful surprises in store for Sophia. She celebrated the holiday alone, sitting in front of the television, sipping a glass of champagne, listening to the chimes broadcast on TV. But could this be considered a celebration? She drank champagne, ate a store-bought salad and herring under a fur coat, and then, concealing her tears in her pillow, she fell asleep. Sophia's heart was breaking. Why? Why am I left alone? Yes, maybe my colleagues were right, I am inadequate. Waking up on the first day of the new year, Sophia remembered how she had cried the day before, wiped her swollen eyes, and came to the conclusion that she simply needed to live, accepting life as it is. She needed to cast aside all empty dreams and worries about the future. When my end comes, that's when I'll rest. Let them bury me at the public's expense. After all, I'm doing a noble deed, taking care of the homeless, she decided. Sophia quickly pulled herself together, made breakfast, and headed to work. The shelter was within walking distance of her home, which was very convenient. Wet snow was falling on the street, turning into mud on the asphalt. The weather did not match the festive mood at all. People hurried past on the streets as if they didn't notice a motionless body lying on the roadside. Sophia noticed something black in a recess and stopped. It was a jacket worn by a man lying face down. Passers-by paid no attention to him and continued on their way. Sophia stood there for nearly a minute, unable to take her eyes off the man on the ground. I need to help, she told herself. She squatted down and tried to wake the man, gently nudging him. Hello, sir, are you okay? She asked, but the man didn't respond. With effort, Sophia turned him onto his back and noticed that he was breathing. He appeared to be no older than 35. What a beautiful face, crossed Sophia's mind, but she quickly pushed those thoughts away. I need to think about saving a person, not the beauty of his face, she scolded herself internally. Standing up, she shouted, someone, help, in the hope of attracting the attention of passers-by. But the passers-by continued to hurry past, paying no attention to what was happening. Some even looked at Sophia and the man on the ground with mockery, as if saying, look at that fool, getting involved with some dying homeless guy. People, what's wrong with you? Sophia wondered. We may consider ourselves inadequate, but we care about the lives of others. Meanwhile, those who think they're smart, successful, and important just walk on by, caring only about their sandwiches and their work. Sophia realized that this was not the time for philosophical pondering. Not the time for that, she told herself. She decided to try to lift the man, but it proved to be a difficult task as he was quite heavy. I need help, Sophia shouted again, hoping that someone would eventually pay attention. But even this cry did not catch the passers-by's notice. All right, to hell with all of you, she cursed at the people, I'll handle this on my own. Sophia dragged the man like a sack. Where am I actually taking this poor soul? It would have been more logical to call an ambulance, she thought, becoming completely flustered. At this moment, the man began to regain consciousness. Where am I? He asked. You're on the street. Sophia gave him an obvious answer. Where do you live? Where are your loved ones? Can you call them? The man tried to get up but failed. Leave me, young lady, he pleaded. How can I leave you? Do you want to freeze on the street? Sophia replied. It seems to be my fate, the man said bitterly. Shall I call an ambulance for you? Sophia asked. Why? A bitter, ironic chuckle escaped from the man. Then he coughed and added, will the ambulance patch me up so I freeze longer? Don't you have a home? No, I have nothing at all, except for the clothes I'm wearing. I've lost everything, the man replied. So, you're homeless? Sophia asked. That's putting it mildly, the man grimly smirked again. Our client, Sophia thought. Get up, I won't leave you to die, Sophia firmly declared and began dragging the man toward the shelter. Leave me be, the man resisted. Why do you need me? Please, just be quiet, Sophia snapped. 10 minutes later, she rang the shelter's doorbell. What's going on? The drowsy guard, Uncle Wright, appeared. Picked him up from the street, Sophia said. He was freezing. Together with Uncle Wright, Sophia dragged the man into the reception area. The shelter's staff were already bustling in the hallway, the technician, the cook, the sanitation workers, and the doctors. So, Sophia, my dear, found yourself a groom. Aunt Thea, the janitor, joked crudely, nodding toward the man in the black jacket. What groom? He was freezing on the street, Sophia replied seriously. The janitor's joke was picked up by others, and soon the entire floor was discussing how Cinderella had found herself a prince. We just need to wash this groom well and shave his armpits, Aunt Holly, the cook, joked, always considering herself a humorist. Sophia was deeply hurt to the point of tears. She had saved a person, and her colleagues were making fun of her misfortune and her loneliness. She recalled the wise words from a social network, never laugh at pain you haven't experienced yourself. Yes, even on the internet, you could find insightful thoughts. In the reception room, the gloomy Dr. Marvin cast a glance at the new arrival. Where did he come from? The doctor asked. I picked him up from the street, he was freezing, Sophia explained. Marvin snorted. As if we don't have enough homeless people here. Does your protege have a name? Blake, the man struggled to say. My name is Blake. And I'm Sophia, the young woman introduced herself for some reason. Marvin made a clicking sound and said, Sophia, you're not on a dating website. And you, Blake, undress. To my underwear. The man inquired. Take off your underwear too. I need to examine you, the doctor replied. Doctor, perhaps you can let me go, and I'll be on my way. Why bother with a doomed man? Blake requested. What's with the chatter? The doctor exclaimed indignantly. Why, Sophia, did you bring him here for no reason? I'm telling you, undress. Blake, apparently embarrassed, slowly undressed. Marvin scrutinized the patient critically from all angles and let out a satisfied huff. Well, no frostbite, you're just frozen. the doctor concluded. So, can I be on my way? Blake asked, still struggling with his speech. That's out of the question, the doctor objected. Get dressed, Sophia will take you to the rest area. Let's go, the girl said, taking Blake by the arm. As they walked down the hallway, they heard the voices of the sanitation workers. Look, our Cinderella is marching with her groom. They say there aren't enough princes for everyone. Sophia shrank back, feeling uncomfortable with their mockery. It seems they're making fun of you because of me, Blake whispered quietly. Yes, don't pay attention to it, Sophia replied curtly. But still, Blake said, it would have been better if you introduced me to your own fate. Are you tired of living? Angrily, Sophia asked, what did you say? Don't ever say that. Everyone has to live. Wow, you're quite feisty, Blake mumbled and didn't attempt to start a conversation with Sophia again. Sophia led Blake to a room where homeless people slept on bunk beds. There was an available spot for Blake as well. She handed him a fresh set of pajamas and bed linens, and Blake lay down on his bed. You're right, Sophia, he said. Before I die, I'll at least get a proper night's sleep. You know, when I was wandering the streets, I could hardly sleep. How long were you on the streets? Sophia asked. A month, Blake replied. Sophia was horrified. On average, homeless people lie for about 3 years, Blake said, so I still had plenty of time to live, and he chuckled. That's not a laughing matter, Sophia sternly said before leaving the room. Throughout the day, Sophia's colleagues discussed her and Blake, calling them Cinderella and the Prince. The most spiteful of them would say, Sophia isn't lucky with fiancés. She found a homeless man on the street and dragged him into the shelter. Sophia tried to ignore the malicious gossip of her coworkers, but in truth, she also thought about Blake. He only recently became homeless. I wonder how he ended up on the streets. It doesn't seem like he's an alcoholic who drank away his apartment. And the way Blake resisted being saved. He doesn't seem to want to live, does he? Sophia wondered. Finally, Blake seemed like an interesting and intelligent man, quite unlike the typical shelter resident. In the middle of the shift, Sophia went to check on him. Blake was already awake, sitting on his bed, looking much better than in the morning. Hello, Sophia, Blake greeted her. When the young woman met her senior colleague, she tried to maintain a stern tone and said, we saw each other today. Despite her attempt to sound formal, there was a sincere desire to express gratitude in her words. But I still want to greet you, my savior. How are you feeling? Sophia asked. The woman saved replied, thank you, splendid. I'll bring you some food. Sophia headed to the kitchen. Then, trying to maintain her indifference, she asked Aunt Holly, the cook, for a portion for the new patient. Aunt Holly couldn't resist making a joke. I bet it's for your new beau. Sophia gave a grim nod in response and took a tray of food. The tray held a bowl of aromatic buckwheat porridge, a plate of beet salad, a cup of tea, along with a spoon and a buttered sandwich. Sophia brought this tray back to Blake, who gratefully accepted it and started eating. After finishing the meal, Blake returned the tray to Sophia and expressed his gratitude. You know, I've dined in the finest restaurants, but I've never eaten as deliciously and eagerly as today. Sophia responded with her customary seriousness, this is a standard portion. You will eat like this every day now. Blake smiled and said, it will be even more enjoyable if you bring me the food, Sophia. Sophia slightly changed her tone, saying, I brought you food as an exception. You can use your legs to get to the cafeteria. Blake responded with a smile, as you wish, Sophia. I don't need any privileges. As they parted, Sophia added with a hint of softness, goodbye, try to get some more sleep. In response to Blake's words of gratitude, he offered her a riddle. An archer on a hunt shot a gazelle. The arrow pierced the gazelle's leg and came out through its ear. How could this happen? However, Sophia wasn't ready for a new riddle and expressed her irritation, saying, oh, don't torment me with your riddles, before leaving the room, visibly annoyed. Later in the evening, Sophia found herself having microwave-heated dumplings for dinner. Her thoughts drifted back to Blake. An interesting man, she admitted to herself. Where did he learn that riddle about the archer and the gazelle? Sophia also remembered that riddle. She had a slight interest in literature and history, and she knew that this riddle had been posed by the Turkic Sultan Hüseyin Bey Kara to his subjects. Only the great poet and thinker had managed to solve it. The answer was simple. The gazelle had lifted its leg to scratch its ear just as the archer released the arrow, causing it to pass through the leg and pierce the ear. Only a highly intellectual person would know such a riddle, Sophia concluded. However, she couldn't shake the question of how Blake ended up on the streets. I need to ask him, Sophia thought. She still couldn't bring herself to admit that she was interested in Blake as a man. She knew all too well how easily one could get burned in relationships. On the other hand, having an interest in a homeless man she had literally picked up from the street and brought to the shelter seemed absurd and even shameful. After having dinner and falling asleep, Sophia entered a dream where she found Blake. Together, they strolled along the seashore, picking up beautiful pebbles and seashells. Then they headed to a restaurant where, incredibly, they were served buckwheat porridge with a beet salad, exactly the same dishes Sophia had brought to Blake on his tray earlier that day. In the morning, Sophia arrived at work, where Aunt Holly and Aunt Thea immediately teased her, saying, "Well, did you miss your prince?" Uncle Wright, the security guard, added, "Your groom is in the workshop." In the workshop, Sophia was surprised. The shelter had a workshop for assembling boxes to involve homeless individuals in productive work. They were compensated with a small wage for their efforts. This work was voluntary, and it often took a lot of persuasion to convince former wanderers to participate, as the money earned could be spent on substances, which was undesirable. However, Blake displayed his uniqueness once again. Instead of taking a few days to rest after a month of living on the streets, he went straight to the workshop. Midday, Sophia made a visit there under some pretext and found Blake engrossed in assembling boxes. Upon seeing the nurse, he instantly stopped working and greeted her with a friendly smile. "Hello, Sophia, and here I thought you wouldn't come to visit me," Blake said cheerfully. Sophia responded with a hint of surprise, "Am I obligated to visit you?" Ignoring the slight sharpness in Sophia's question, Blake asked, "So, have you solved my riddle about the archer and the gazelle?" Sophia replied without a smile, "Very simple. The gazelle lifted its leg to scratch its ear, and the arrow, when it pierced the leg, went through the ear." Blake applauded like a child and exclaimed, "Bravo." Then Sophia suddenly noticed, "By the way, I know who Ake is. A wonderful poet, don't you think?" Blake confirmed, "Wonderful." Soon after, Sophia left the workshop. Later, Aunt Thea, who was cleaning the floors, playfully asked Sophia, "So, how's your groom?" Sophia just shrugged, dismissing this intrusive question. After work, Sophia prepared a light dinner for herself, consisting of a salad and a couple of sausages, but thoughts of Blake came back to her. She wondered, am I being too harsh on him? She thought, after all, he hasn't done anything to me. He wants to be friends, understandably, as I was the one who saved him, so he naturally gravitates towards me. It seems like I'm getting angry at Blake just because they've dubbed us groom and bride, which is silly. Sophia made a decision, I'll do something nice for Blake. With that thought, she went to sleep. In the morning, after getting herself ready, she picked a volume of Ake's poems from her bookshelf and tucked it into her purse before heading to work. What a pleasant man, Sophia thought about Blake. She admitted to herself that she hadn't had such enjoyable company in a long time as with Blake, this unconventional homeless man. None of her numerous exes had been such a sensible conversationalist, so witty, attentive, and considerate. Sophia even stopped getting upset about her colleagues' crude jokes about Cinderella and the tramp, the groom, and the bride. And why not? It wouldn't be bad to have such a wonderful groom, the girl told herself. Blake remained a mystery to Sophia. She didn't know the main thing. How did he end up on the streets? Did he ever have a family? Why didn't he turn to his relatives for help when he lost his shelter? Does it really matter? The main thing is that he is a good, kind person, Sophia reassured herself. Sometimes, bold dreams engulfed Sophia. In them, Blake earned a lot of money in the workshop, restored his passport, and then they moved into her apartment together, got married, and a year later, they had a child. But she quickly shattered these dreams, reminding herself that she was accustomed to getting burnt by men. Over time, Sophia decided to simply enjoy her time with Blake without making any plans. 3 weeks had passed. One day, Sophia was helping Aunt Holly in the kitchen, doing dishes when she suddenly saw Blake. It was unusual because he usually didn't come into the kitchen, especially at odd hours. "Hello," Sophia said, feeling a slight embarrassment. "Hello, Sophia," Blake replied with a joyful smile. "I have good news, today they paid me some money for my cardboard boxes." "Is that so?" "Congratulations," Sophia smiled. "Yes, today is the payday for the workshop employees," Blake explained. Blake, apparently, wasn't bothered at all by Aunt Holly's presence, to whom he politely nodded. "Do you happen to have the day off tomorrow?" Blake asked. "Yes," Sophia admitted. "It's a day off, so allow me, charming lady, to invite you for a cup of coffee," Blake proposed, improving his manners. Aunt Holly, shifting her gaze from Blake to Sophia, chuckled. "What?" The girl didn't understand. "Aunt Holly, she made a joke," Blake explained. "I'm inviting you for a cup of coffee at a cafe." "No need," Sophia replied, feeling flustered. Nevertheless, lady, I insist. I want to at least thank you for saving my life, Blake insisted. You don't have to, really, the orderly repeated. There's a park nearby, Blake said, seemingly not hearing Sophia's refusal. I'll wait for you tomorrow at 12 by the main gates. Well, now I need to get back to the workshop. Aunt Holly watched him leave and burst into laughter. Then she turned to the orderly. So, Sophia, will you go on a date with your prince? It's none of your business. The girl suddenly flared up and also left the kitchen, leaving the dishes unwashed. Aunt Holly had a loose tongue, and soon the entire shelter staff was talking about the upcoming date between Blake and Sophia. Everyone gave the young woman mocking advice on how to behave on the date with Blake. Only Aunt Thea, dragging her mop at the end of her shift, said, yes, Sophia won't go on a date with this Blake, she doesn't have the spirit for it. And yet, I will go, Sophia thought when her inner conflict got the best of her. Why shouldn't I go on a date with a man? I am such a pushover, after all. However, when Sophia returned home, her resolve weakened. To go or not to go, maybe I'll consult the daisy. As always, Sophia had a light salad for dinner and couldn't decide whether to go on a date with Blake. Okay, the morning is wiser than the evening. I'll just wake up tomorrow and decide, she decided. Sophia went to bed without setting an alarm on her phone. She woke up at 11 a.m., and there was only an hour left until her appointment with Blake. For a modern girl, this might seem too little time to get ready. However, Sophia decided not to rush and relaxed, thinking, if Blake really wants to meet me, he'll wait for me. She spent her morning in a cozy routine, taking a shower, having breakfast, drinking a cup of tea, putting on makeup, and choosing her outfit. When she left the house, it was already noon. Probably, Blake didn't wait for me, Sophia thought. He wouldn't stand in the cold for half an hour. However, to her surprise, Blake stood at the entrance to the park, smiling, and he held a bouquet of brightly colored roses in his hands. Sophia, I'm glad to see you, Blake said, and the girl felt guilty for her delay. So, you waited for me for half an hour, Blake? Sophia asked. Did you freeze? I walked briskly in circles, and I didn't freeze at all, Blake replied, still smiling. A real man, the girl thought as Blake handed her the bouquet of roses. These roses are for you, Sophia. The young woman accepted the flowers with gratitude and smiled at Blake. Well, let's not stand out in the cold any longer, Blake suggested. Let's go to the cafe. They headed to the Cozy Forest Cafe located in the park. Blake and Sophia took a table by the window, and the man ordered 2 cups of aromatic milk coffee. The conversation started smoothly and pleasantly. Blake discussed poetry, flowers, and interesting movies. What a wonderful conversationalist, Sophia marveled to herself. Unbeknownst to her, she started telling him about her life, how she grew up in an orphanage, how she became interested in Eastern literature, and how she had been unlucky in her relationships with men. Blake listened attentively and was tactful in his questions. Sophia felt like she wanted to talk to this person, and talk a lot. It seems like you're tired, Blake remarked. Allow me to walk you to your building. Sophia agreed, and they left the cafe together. Farewelling Blake and already crossing the threshold of her apartment, Sophia suddenly realized that she had missed an important moment. Why didn't I ask him how he ended up on the street? That's so strange. The next day at work, everyone talked about one thing: Cinderella on a date with a homeless man. Aunt Holly had clearly tried her best when Blake offered to meet Sophia. Colleagues were playing out a drama, but inside Sophia, there was a protest. Why shouldn't I have the right to go on a date with a man? Sophia kept silent, but her gaze proudly conveyed, so what if he's a shelter resident? He's polite and gallant. Sophia realized that yesterday's date might have been the best in her life. She had experience with princes and princesses who needed attention and were afraid of offending. But Blake wasn't a prince, he was a true gentleman. Sophia headed to the workshop, knowing that Blake worked there. A real man was assembling boxes when she entered. Hello, Sophia greeted joyfully. Hello, Sophia, Blake replied instantly. Are you still assembling boxes? Sophia asked, smiling. Yes, I enjoy working with my hands, Blake replied, smiling back. And I need the money. What do you need the money for? Sophia asked, still smiling. To take one charming lady to a cafe. Blake looked at Sophia, slightly perspiring. We're planning to meet after work, right? If you insist, Sophia replied. Let's switch to you. I'm glad. Sophia became so bold that before leaving the workshop, she gave Blake an airy kiss. For 2 weeks, the shelter staff couldn't stop discussing the relationship between Sophia and Blake. Even the homeless residents of the shelter joined the discussions, either with intrusive curiosity or a hint of irony. But for Sophia, it no longer mattered. She honestly admitted to herself, I like this man, and decided that on their next date, she would definitely take Blake for an honest conversation to learn about his past and where he came from. 2 weeks had passed, and Blake, having earned some money from the cardboard boxes, decided to invite Sofia for a coffee. Sofia was thrilled, even happy. This time, she arrived at the park gates without delay, and Blake was already waiting, holding a bouquet of purple roses. What beautiful roses! Sofia exclaimed in admiration. How did you know, Blake, that purple roses are my favorite flowers? Intuition, Blake smiled. Men can have it too. Are you ready for a walk in the park? Of course, Sophia replied. The park smelled of spring, the dark snow was melting underfoot, birds chattered in the leafless trees. The turquoise sky was radiant, and the air was filled with a wonderful freshness that invigorated the soul. I rarely come to the park, Sophia confessed, even though it's just a few steps from my home. Thank you, Blake. The man smiled and suggested, shall we go to the cafe now? They sat at the same table by the window, and Blake ordered coffee and pastries, apologizing as he did so, I'm sorry, but this is all I can treat you to. Unfortunately, they don't pay much in the workshop. Sophia, despite his modesty, was curious and asked, by the way, Blake, how long do you plan to work with us? Do you have any long-term plans? Blake shrugged and replied, plans. I can't stay in the shelter forever. I intend to save money, restore my documents, rent an apartment, and find a job. I hope our acquaintance will continue after that. Of course, Sophia nodded. Blake offered, more pastries. I think not, Sophia smiled. Coffee and pastries are enough. I don't think you can feed a man for long with cream puffs. Sophia suddenly suggested, you know, Blake, let's go to my place. I'll treat you now. Blake hesitated and said, well, it's a bit awkward. Showing determination, Sophia stood up and assured him, it's not inconvenient at all, let's go. Blake paid for the coffee and pastries, then followed Sophia, who led him to her apartment. Riding the elevator, they entered her cozy abode. Take off your coat, she said with a smile. Blake admired the interior and whispered, it's so cozy and beautiful here, while examining reproductions of classical paintings on the walls. Afterward, he moved to the kitchen and sat at the table. Sophia poured tea for her guests and then opened the refrigerator. Oh, it's a bit barren in my fridge, she said with a sigh. I didn't expect to bring you here. Nothing, Blake smiled. Sophia suggested, you know what we'll do. I'll give you my bank card and you'll go to the store. I'll write you a shopping list. Blake started to object, but Sophia responded with a smile, no objections accepted. She took a pen and paper, quickly composing a shopping list: bread, salami, mayonnaise, eggs, wine. Blake read the list and asked, wine? Are you a teetotaler? I can do without it, actually, but believe me, I'm not a drinker, Sophia cheerfully replied. I can enjoy good wine, and I'm not one of those alcoholics. So go ahead, my knight, to the store. Knight. Blake repeated with pleasure. Understood, my fair lady. If you have any further text requests or additional questions, feel free to let me know. The man quickly went to the store and brought back the groceries. Sophia poured wine into glasses and asked, what shall we toast to? To you, my dear Sophia, Blake said, you saved my life, and I owe you an immeasurable debt. Sophia and Blake clinked their glasses and each took a sip. Then, Sophia began preparing dinner. She boiled eggs, grated beets, prepared fish and herring under a fur coat. She also made sandwiches with salami and cheese. She then invited Blake, saying, please join me at the table. A feast fit for the gods, Blake exclaimed. Better than in restaurants, Sophia playfully inquired. Better, but you said you dined in restaurants, Blake, in your previous life. I wonder who you were. A Saudi prince, a millionaire's son, a shadowy oligarch. Sophia, her wine influence already noticeable, laughed merrily, her eyes sparkling. Everything is much more prosaic and at the same time scarier, Blake joked. But Sophia persisted and asked, still, tell me about yourself. I can say one thing, the man replied, right now I'm in the company of a beautiful, kind girl, and I'm quite happy. I'm about to start a new life, and I hope that an important place in it will be taken by you. You're not saying anything about your past, Sophia pouted and lightly hit Blake with a rose. I'll tell you about everything in due time, I promise. But for now, Blake approached Sophia and gently embraced her. The young woman didn't pull away. "Sophia," Blake whispered, "I love you." At that moment, Sophia was the first to press her lips to Blake's, initiating a sweet, long, lingering kiss. "You are sent to me by fate," Blake tenderly said as Sophia finally pulled away from his lips and nestled her face against his chest. "For now, there isn't much I can tell you about myself, but in time, as I get back on my feet and start a new life, you'll learn everything." "Yes, yes," Sophia whispered in response. "Don't tell me anything just yet. I'll wait as long as it takes." As light as a reed, Blake scooped up the young woman in his arms and carried her to the bedroom, where he gently placed her on the bed. He was incredibly tender with Sophia, and she thought that she had never had a better man. In the morning, Sophia woke up feeling happy, lying alone in bed. "Blake," she whispered nervously, fearing that her beloved had left. "Yes, my fair lady," and Blake entered the bedroom, carrying 2 plates with omelets. "Here's breakfast, my lady." "How sweet," Sophia exclaimed. "I had a wonderful time with you," she confessed during breakfast. "You are so gentle and kind." "I had a wonderful time with you, too," Blake replied. "Well, it's time for work," Sophia suddenly realized. "Yes, it's time for me to assemble my boxes," Blake smiled. "If you have any further text requests or additional questions, feel free to let me know." They arrived at the shelter together, hand in hand, like a couple. The shelter staff and residents greeted them with hearty laughter. "So, are you definitely engaged now?" Aunt Holly asked, playfully smiling. Blake smiled, shrugged his shoulders, and headed to his workshop, while Sophia, looking defiant, replied, "Why not?" Aunt Holly couldn't help but clap her hands mockingly, saying, "Congratulations, congratulations." Soon, the entire shelter, both staff and residents, were talking about how the young nurse Sophia was dating a homeless man. Blake and Sophia spent time together, meeting several times. Each time Blake received his salary, he would give Sophia a modest gift, flowers, an inexpensive ring, or a charming trinket. Sophia would invite Blake to her home, treat him to delicious meals, share wine, and wake up next to him in the morning, feeling like a happy woman. She accepted the fact that Blake didn't reveal anything about his past, and she focused on the present. Compassionate Aunt Thea would sometimes caution Sophia, "Aren't you tired of getting burned by men? You've reached a point where you're sleeping with a homeless man from the shelter, picked up a fiancé on the street, no less. He'll leave you, your Blake will play with you like a gilded trinket, and then he'll toss you in the mud and trample you." Sophia defended Blake, saying, "Blake is not like everyone else." "How do you know?" Aunt Thea would ask. "I don't know, I can feel it," Sophia would say. "That's just it, you don't know," Aunt Thea would conclude. "I'm not a gilded trinket, I'm golden," Sophia would muse, delving into her thoughts. Her thoughts persistently troubled her, like tiny seeds of doubt taking root in her young soul. Sophia was afraid of the bitter loss of Blake, a man who had become her pillar and the meaning of her life. What if all these moments of happiness are just a game in the shelter? Her thoughts swirled tortuously like restless phantoms. What if Blake is just having fun here and will leave, leaving me alone, not taking me into his new life? Will I end up, once again, without support, like an empty pitcher? One day, during the usual ritual, Sophia, as always, dutifully helped Aunt Holly with the dishes, while Aunt Thea sparkled as she polished and gleamed throughout the kitchen. Suddenly, Uncle Ray, who often dropped by for a cup of fragrant tea, burst into their everyday world. An invisible wave of tension filled the room when Blake appeared in the doorway. Sophia felt her heart lurch with bitter reality, seeing something in his eyes that she didn't expect. "Sophia," Blake began, lacking any trace of warmth in his voice, and her heart pierced with sadness. "Yes," she replied, trying to keep her composure. "Sophia," Blake repeated, his voice low, like the harbinger of sad news. "Today, I finally got my passport restored, and I've earned enough money to rent a place for myself." Sophia swallowed hard, fearing the continuation of his words. "And," she whispered, as if in prayer. "I'm leaving the shelter," Blake declared, and Sophia's heart felt like it was pierced by a needle. "I have to build my own life." "Yes," Sophia sighed sadly, accepting the inevitable loss. "Today I'm leaving," Blake continued, and the pain in her heart became unbearable. "Don't worry, I won't forget you. I believe in you," Sophia whispered, tears filling her eyes, but she held them back. Blake, without hesitating in front of Aunt Holly, Aunt Thea, and Uncle Ray, gently embraced Sophia and kissed her passionately. At that moment, the room was filled with exclamations of admiration. "Oh, how sweet," Uncle Ray exclaimed, genuinely happy for the young couple. Overwhelmed by a surge of emotions, Sophia whispered to Blake, "Goodbye, don't forget me." Blake took one more lingering look at his beloved, as if etching her face into his memory forever, then turned decisively and left the shelter. Sophia, trying to hold back her tears, couldn't help but sob quietly. "Well," Aunt Holly asked with a teasing smile, "has your fiancé flown the coop like a rooster?" In response, laughter and jokes filled the room to lighten the mood. "Roosters don't fly," Uncle Ray humorously noted. Then, fly away like a parrot," Aunt Holly continued to jest, trying to uplift Sophia's spirits. However, Aunt T, always straightforward, expressed her opinion. "You're a fool, Sophia. Your Blake used and discarded you. Did you engage in this with him, I wonder?" Sophia reacted with anger. "That's none of your business." Nevertheless, Aunt T sighed and condescendingly added, "So, you did." After that, she walked away to tend to her own business, leaving Sophia with her own thoughts and feelings. Sophia managed to finish her shift somehow, but painful scars remained in the young woman's heart. Doubt scratched at her inner world, and she didn't want to accept what the ants from the shelter had said. Troubling thoughts swarmed around her like a swarm of wasps, and it seemed to her that parting with Blake had been cold and indifferent. Why didn't he even look back when he left the kitchen? Mocking lines like "he flew away like a parrot" continued to haunt her thoughts. In the evening, Sophia walked home, and even though spring had long arrived, the sky overhead was dark gray today and thick snow fell, melting in the air before reaching the ground. The world felt prickly and unwelcoming to her, mirroring her inner state. She had the desire to just relax and cry, pondering questions like, who was Blake really? He remained a mystery to her, the man she had saved from frostbite one winter morning. Blake left without revealing anything about himself, leaving her in the dark. Who were his loved ones? Were his parents still alive? Maybe he even had a wife and children. Sometimes dark doubts tormented Sophia that everything they had together was just a random amorous adventure for him. "I'm a fool, a fool, a fool," she silently repeated to herself as she approached her building. Upon entering her apartment, Sophia decisively undressed and quickly washed up. Then she headed to the kitchen, despite having no appetite. The table with cabbage and tomato paste was already set, and Sophia picked up her fork, intending to start eating. However, when the scent of stewed cabbage and tomato paste filled the air, it seemed to permeate every pore of her skin, evoking a terrible sensation. Reacting like a panther, Sophia threw the plate into the trash bin and rushed to the bathroom, suffering from nausea. "What is happening to me? Where is all this coming from all of a sudden?" Suddenly, she felt a strange craving for salty mushrooms. What could this mean? Sophia hesitated to fully contemplate this thought, but despite the late hour and her fatigue, she quickly got dressed and headed to the nearest pharmacy. There, she bought a pregnancy test. Despite her doubts, the test showed 2 clear pink lines. "My goodness, I'm pregnant," Sophia thought. Getting pregnant by a stranger she had picked up from the street, who had earned a little money to get by and then disappeared, seemed utterly absurd. Fate, it seemed, was playing a joke on Sophia. "I'll have an abortion," was the first thought that came to her in despair. However, in the very next moment, she made a resolute decision. No, 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 no. Despite all the difficulties and doubts, Sophia believed in Blake, believed that he would return for her, even though the rational basis for this belief was extremely fragile. "I won't harm our baby, motherhood is a joy. Maybe I'll never be able to get pregnant again. I must keep the child, and if Blake returns, we'll have a complete family. If he doesn't return, then I'll raise my little one on my own." Sophia decided to keep her secret news hidden at work. Among her colleagues, she had no close friends, and she didn't want to subject herself to ridicule or pitiful attempts to pry into her life. But, despite her efforts, avoiding mockery was not possible. Sophia was literally greeted with a song, the groom ran away like a rooster. Yes, her pregnancy remained a secret only for a while. As perceptive as experienced detectives, Aunts Holly and T noticed that Sophia started bringing pickles and salty cookies for her lunch, and they suspected that something unusual was happening. Not only did they guess, but it seemed they had even convinced themselves that Sophia was pregnant. Since then, conversations at the shelter revolved solely around this topic. Blake impregnated you, and he disappeared. You should have used protection, silly." Sophia responded to the taunts with a strong and proud demeanor, but her heart was torn apart by sorrow. How did this happen? Will Blake really not return? Will I be raising the child on my own? After all, Blake didn't even save my phone number, she thought, battling sleepless nights and doubts. Days, as if in a wrong dream, slowly passed while Sophia continued to perform her duties at work, endure taunts, and become increasingly convinced that she had indeed been naive. Blake, who initially seemed sweet and attentive, turned out to be nothing more than an exploiter of Sofia. Yes, he gave her flowers, quoted Ike's poems, and drew inspiration from romantic comedies that would go down in history, but in the end, he turned out to be just like all the other Cedars. 3 long months went by, and Sophia's belly was noticeably protruding. This became a fertile topic for Aunt T's and Aunt Holly's sarcastic comments, and even Uncle Wright, who didn't miss an opportunity to tease, asked, "Sophia, are you planning to raise the child or find a new homeless guy next time?" It was time to take maternity leave. Sophia, feeling bitter embarrassment, almost cried under the condescending gazes of her colleagues. She approached the door of the boss's office and knocked. "May I come in?" She barely managed to say in her state. "Come in," came the reply. It was time to officially request maternity leave, and Sophia, filled with a sense of embarrassment, nearly withered under the piercing gazes of her colleagues. Trembling, she made her way to the boss's office door and knocked. "May I?" Sophia attempted to make her voice more confident. "Come in." Sophia cautiously opened the door and entered the office, where her boss, Ken, engrossed in folders and papers, didn't pay much attention to her. "What is it, Sophia?" the boss calmly inquired without looking up. Sophia began to speak, embarrassed but firm. "I need to take maternity leave." The boss raised his eyes and assessed Sophia with a calculating look, as if weighing her request. Suddenly, thoughts raced through her mind. "Yes, I'll do it. I'll give birth to a healthy baby, give them a beautiful name, and love my child, regardless of past hurts. I might even be grateful to Blake for making me a mother. I'll become the happiest parent and raise a worthy member of society." The boss spoke, his thoughts playing out. "Of course, you should take maternity leave. But what does your fiancé think about it?" Sophia froze for a moment. "My fiancé," she repeated syllable by syllable, flaring up with indignation. "Ken, are you mocking me?" Her voice was charged with anger and determination. Ken, usually stern and inscrutable, wasn't offended by Sophia's boldness. Instead, he merely smiled, picked up the telephone receiver and said, "Blake, come in." The mention of Blake left Sophia puzzled and bewildered. A few moments later, Blake entered the office with a smile on his face, carrying purple roses. "Hello, Ken," Blake greeted the boss and then turned to Sophia, offering her the flowers. However, instead of taking the bouquet, Sophia burst into tears. "Where have you been for these 3 months?" she asked with despair. "I'm pregnant with your child." "I know, dear, we have a lot to discuss. I won't leave you again." With tears in her eyes, Sophia buried her face in Blake's chest, and he gently embraced the young woman and led her out of the office. "Wow," Aunt T commented upon seeing Sophia and Blake. And Uncle Wright, a kind-hearted man at heart, couldn't resist a jest. "Oh my, our parrot has returned." Blake and Sophia walked through the floor, in full view of the staff and shelter residents, drawing attention with their tender affection. Everyone viewed the scene with admiration and warmth, and their mutual devotion warmed the hearts of all those present. "Where are we headed?" Sophia wiped away tears of happiness and asked, not letting go of Blake's hand. Blake smiled and replied, "We're heading to the most exquisite restaurant in town. It may not be as delightful as your cooking, but I must treat you on this special day." Sophia couldn't hide her surprise. "But I haven't finished my work day yet." Blake reassured her, "Don't worry, I've already arranged everything with Ken. You can consider your maternity leave started. We'll discuss all our questions and concerns, including our baby's name." Waiting at the shelter's gate was a luxurious car. Blake politely bowed and opened the door for Sophia, inviting her inside. He took the driver's seat, and Sophia still couldn't believe what was happening. "Where are you taking me, Blake?" she asked, barely believing her happiness. Blake smiled mysteriously. "We're going to choose a restaurant where we'll celebrate our wedding." Sophia gasped as if she had entered a fairy tale. Half an hour later, Blake parked in front of an upscale, elite restaurant. Sophia asked with trepidation, "Are we going here?" This extravagant restaurant was something unimaginable for her, something she hadn't even dared to dream about. Blake smiled and replied, "Yes, my lovely lady." He exited the car first and politely opened the door for Sophia. Then he led her into the restaurant, where the doorman saluted the guests on the grand staircase. In the luxurious hall, illuminated by sparkling round chandeliers, Blake and Sophia were welcomed by a radiant waitress. Blake confidently said, "We have a table by the window reserved." The waitress politely responded, "Certainly, I'll escort you," and led them to their table, offering the menu. "When you're ready to order, please ring the bell," she added. Blake opened the menu and handed it to Sophia, saying, "Choose everything delicious, my dear." Sophia couldn't take her eyes off the photos of exquisite dishes in the menu, and her mouth watered. However, the prices intimidated her. Blake, the prices here are quite high, she admitted with a sigh. Blake smiled and said, just cover the prices with your hand and choose dishes based on the names and pictures. Sofia was puzzled. Are you sure you can afford everything? Let's say, the homeless guy you picked up from the street is actually very wealthy. Blake smiled mysteriously. Let's eat first, and then I'll tell you everything. In the end, Sophia placed her order, selecting poached eggs, French toast, and a vegetable salad, while Blake ordered a schnitzel and an Olivier salad. For drinks, they chose a light red wine. Blake tenderly said, "You're pregnant, but one glass won't hurt you. To your health and the health of our little one." After just one glass, Sophia felt the alcohol start to take effect. She hadn't drunk alcohol for a long time, and now she felt a lightness like a bird soaring through the skies. It seems that Cinderella has indeed found her prince, she thought happily. Everything around her felt incredible, like a fairy tale. Blake refilled their glasses, but Sophia declined, saying, "No, I've had enough. Now I want to hear from you." Blake kissed her hand and said, "My dear, the first thing I want to tell you is that I've returned for good, if you'll have me." Tears of joy filled Sophia's eyes. "Of course, I'll have you," she replied. "For two reasons. My child needs a biological father, and I love you." Blake smiled and said, "I love you too, my dear Sophia. You not only saved me from freezing, but you've given me the will to keep living. You are the best woman I've ever met, believe me." Sophia nodded and asked, "And now, tell me everything from the very beginning, from the moment you ended up on the street." Blake frowned and sighed deeply. "Let's start from the very beginning. I'm the son of a billionaire, the owner of a large chain of beauty salons. Our business was quite successful, bringing in a stable income. I also had a brother and a sister. My father didn't really like my brother and sister, but he was never hard on me." Sophia couldn't help but notice the past tense Blake used and asked, "He wasn't hard on you? Why are you talking about your father in the past tense, Blake?" Blake explained, "My father passed away recently, but let me tell you everything step by step." Sophia agreed, "Yes, please tell me. Why did your father love you and not your brother and sister?" Blake pondered for a moment before answering, "Well, how can I put it? I don't want to speak ill of my brother and sister, but my brother grew up as rough and insolent. Barely reaching the age of 18, he openly frequented questionable places, used drugs, and abused alcohol. My sister, well, she wasn't the most virtuous girl, to put it mildly. And the most important thing was that she adored my brother and always put his interests above everything." Sophia was intrigued and asked, "And what about you? What were you like?" Blake smiled, "I was a quiet, modest boy. At the age of 15, I discovered the world of Persian and Turkic classical poetry. The same ache, remember. I grew up among books, composed stories and poems. My father often sighed and said that he had one son who loved business and another who was a romantic poet. He wondered whom to entrust the business to." Sophia nodded in understanding and asked, "So, what did your father decide?" Blake continued, "The answer to that question was in his will. When my father passed away and we opened his will in the presence of a lawyer, it stated that 80% of the assets were to go to me, while my brother and sister would receive only 10% each. In his farewell letter, my father advised me to rely on trusted managers, not to interfere in the business, live off the interest, and focus on my poetry and Turkology. That's how it was." Sophia was taken aback and asked, "And how did your brother and sister react to your father's decision?" "No, they didn't accept it," Blake replied, gazing into the distance. "So, how did you end up on the streets?" Sophia asked sympathetically. Blake sighed deeply and said, "Oh, it's quite a heavy story. I want to emphasize that I don't want to speak ill of my brother and sister, but it turned out that they had incredible manipulative skills." "Let me hear it." "Blake, I'm ready to listen to you all the way," Sophia said, placing her hand on his shoulder. "Well, my brother and sister devised a cunning plan to portray me as someone with serious mental issues," Blake continued. "It would take a long time to list all the manipulations and deceit they resorted to, but in the end, they convinced close relatives that I needed treatment in a strictly regulated psychiatric hospital. There, in that gloomy institution, I found myself without a passport, with no way to contact the outside world. I was subjected to compulsory heavy medication, and sometimes even physical abuse," Blake concluded, and his hand squeezed Sophia's. "Blake," Sophia said passionately, "this is terrible. But we're together now, and we will find a way to get justice for you and leave this past behind forever." Blake smiled bitterly, recalling the hard times. "For me, Sophia, it was a real test of endurance. During that horrible period spent in the psychiatric hospital, I hadn't lost hope in life yet. Incredibly, I managed to escape from there, and here I am, on the street, with nothing but the clothes on my back. Attempts to seek help from the police quickly failed because, without a passport, they simply ignored me. This had somewhat eroded my faith in the fairness of our legal system. Blake sighed and continued, "For a few weeks, I roamed the cold city and my will to live was dwindling. I fell to the ground, and I was cursing my fate, ready to die. It was at that very moment that you found me, my dear lady, and breathed into me that warm spark of hope. When I ended up in the shelter, ate and cleaned up, I realized that I had a chance, at least, to stay alive and start a new life, even if without my father's wealth. I was considering a plan: return to work, earn enough to get my passport reinstated, rent a room, and find a modest place in the world. I dreamt of you becoming my wife, and we would begin a modest but happy life. But why did you disappear?" Blake continued his story. "After I earned some money, I moved into a rental apartment. Our family lawyer, an honest man, found me and convinced me to fight for what was rightfully mine. My brother and sister were in a moral and legal quagmire, and the legal process brought me justice. But I also had to return to business to prevent the complete ruin of our family business. In the end, thanks to persistent efforts, everything worked out, and I realized it was time to come back to you. I'm sorry for making you go through all of this, Sophia." Blake concluded his story, and Sophia gently kissed him. "It's okay, the main thing is that you're with me now," she said, radiating with joy. Blake got down on one knee in front of Sophia and asked with trembling voice, "Darling, will you marry me?" Sophia's eyes filled with tears of happiness, and she exclaimed, "Yes, yes, of course, I agree." They embraced and merged in a long, passionate kiss, savoring the moment. Then they decided to spend the rest of the evening at a restaurant, discussing their future life together and even choosing a name for their future child. From the restaurant, they went to Blake's apartment, which was located on the 16th floor of an upscale high-rise building, offering a beautiful view of the city. The lovers admired the cityscape and openly dreamt about their future. The next day, they went to a jewelry store where Blake purchased 2 rings made of the highest quality pure gold. A week later, in the luxurious restaurant Sophia chose for the wedding, a magnificent wedding with 500 guests took place. Among the guests were Sophia's colleagues, Uncle Wright, Aunt Holly, Aunt Thea, and many others. They all realized that they had underestimated their Cinderella and even envied her a little, but in a friendly and kind way. It was the beginning of a new, happy chapter in Blake and Sophia's life, a chapter they would write together. The newlyweds went on their honeymoon to Easter Island, a place that had long been a dream for both of them. There, among the mysterious statues and stunning landscapes, they found their happiness and strengthened their love. Upon returning home on schedule, their son was born. A beautiful, healthy boy they named Matthew, in honor of Blake's father. Matthew was the bright embodiment of their love and hopes for a new beginning. Blake became deeply involved in his business and became proficient in its operations. Soon, the profits generated by the salons began to grow, and his perseverance was rewarded. He didn't abandon his passion for poetry, anthropology, and soon published a collection of poems titled Silver Snowflakes, with a dedication to my beloved princess, to whom I owe my life. Sophia stopped working as a nurse and devoted herself entirely to motherhood. Their son Matthew grew up and brought joy to both parents with his presence. The staff at the shelter where she used to work fondly remembered the beautiful Cinderella who was lucky enough to find her prince. Blake and Sophia, after overcoming all difficulties and trials, found their happiness and were able to build a beautiful future together, filling it with love, family warmth, and shared dreams.